On my 72nd birthday, I set the table for 6 people and ended the night eating cake alone. I never imagined that one unanswered invitation would lead me to discover who truly cared about me and who only cared about what I could give them. My name is Margaret Collins, and for most of my life, family was everything to me. I was the kind of grandmother who never forgot a birthday, never missed a school play, and always kept extra cookies in the kitchen just in case one of my grandchildren stopped by. Years ago, they did stop by. They filled this little house with noise, laughter, and endless questions. Back then, I could hardly find a quiet moment for myself. But life has a way of changing slowly, so slowly that you barely notice it until one day the silence becomes impossible to ignore. The morning of my birthday began with hope. I woke up early, just after 6, and stood in the kitchen making pancakes from the same recipe my late husband loved. Sunlight spilled across the countertops while coffee brewed in the old machine that had been with me for nearly 15 years. I smiled to myself as I looked at the dining room table. 6 place settings. 6 folded napkins. 6 small gift bags filled with homemade treats I had prepared for my grandchildren. Ethan was 29 now. Sophie was 27. Jake was 22. Adults with busy lives, I reminded myself. Adults with careers, relationships, and responsibilities. Still, I had called each of them 2 weeks earlier. They all said they would try to come. I spent the afternoon cooking. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. Apple pie. Every dish had a memory attached to it. Every recipe reminded me of a family gathering from years gone by. By 4 o'clock everything was ready. By 5, I had changed into a blue dress and brushed my silver hair carefully. At 6, the candles were lit. At 6:30, the driveway remained empty. I checked my phone. Nothing. At 7, I told myself traffic must be bad. At 7:30, I reheated the food. At 8, the candles had nearly burned out. The house felt larger than usual. Too quiet. Too still. I sat by the front window pretending I wasn't waiting. Pretending. I wasn't disappointed. Then my phone buzzed. For a brief second, my heart lifted. A message from Ethan. Sorry, Grandma. Busy today. Happy birthday. A minute later, Sophie sent a text. Hope you had a great day. We'll celebrate soon. Jake didn't send anything at all. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was angry. Because I realized those messages felt more like obligations than affection. I carried the untouched cake back into the kitchen and placed it inside the refrigerator. The dining room looked exactly as it had 3 hours earlier. 6 plates. 6 empty chairs. 6 reminders of people who once couldn't wait to spend time with me. I turned off the lights and sat alone in the living room. Outside, the neighborhood had gone quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 9 o'clock. Then 10. Then my phone rang. I almost ignored it. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. But something made me answer. Mrs. Collins? A cheerful voice asked. This is Karen from Green Valley Market. I'm calling about something we found connected to a purchase you made a few weeks ago. I frowned and sat up straighter. I'm sorry, I said. What exactly is this about? There was a brief pause before she answered. It's about a lottery ticket. And I think you're going to want to hear this. For a moment, I thought Karen had called the wrong person. I sat there in my recliner, staring at the dark television screen while her words echoed in my mind. A lottery ticket. I almost laughed. 3 weeks earlier, I had stopped at Green Valley Market on my way home from the pharmacy. The cashier had asked if I wanted a ticket for the weekend drawing. I normally said no. That day, for reasons I still could not explain, I handed over a few extra dollars and slipped the ticket into my purse. Then life carried on, and I completely forgot about it. Mrs. Collins? Karen asked again. Are you still there? Yes, I replied quietly. I am here. She explained that a customer rewards account had been linked to the purchase. The store was contacting several customers because one of the winning tickets had been sold there. She could not give details over the phone, but she strongly suggested I check the numbers. After we ended the call, I sat motionless for nearly a minute. Then I stood, walked into the kitchen, and opened the junk drawer beside the refrigerator. The drawer was filled with rubber bands, old receipts, take-out menus, batteries, and notes I had forgotten to throw away. I searched through it slowly. Finally, tucked beneath a folded grocery receipt, I found the ticket. My hands trembled as I carried it to the dining room table. The 6 empty place settings were still there. I picked up my reading glasses and opened the lottery website on my phone. One number matched. Then another. Then another. I checked again because surely I had made a mistake. I checked a third time. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Every number matched. Every single one. I lowered the phone and stared at the ticket. The house remained silent. The clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere outside, a dog barked in the distance. Nothing around me had changed, yet everything had changed. The prize was worth several $1,000,000 before taxes. More money than I had ever imagined having. More money than my late husband and I could have earned in several lifetimes. I expected to feel excited. Instead, I felt strangely calm. I thought about Ethan's text message. I thought about Sophie's promise to celebrate soon. I thought about Jake, who had not contacted me at all. Then I thought about the previous Christmas when I spent the holiday afternoon alone with a frozen dinner because everyone had other plans. I thought about the Mother's Day brunches I was never invited to and the birthdays I remembered for people who rarely remembered mine. Sitting there at the table, I realized something important. The money had not changed who I was. I was still Margaret Collins. I still lived in the same house. I still missed my husband every day. I still loved my family. The only question was whether they would see me differently once they learned about the ticket. By midnight, I had made a decision. I would tell no one. Not yet. First, I wanted to see who would remember me when there was nothing to gain. Then, and only then, would I learn the truth. The next morning, I woke up expecting to feel different. People always talk about life-changing moments, as if they arrive with fireworks and music. Mine arrived with the same coffee maker humming in the kitchen, and the same sunlight filtering through the curtains. I still watered the flowers on the front porch. I still read the local newspaper at the dining room table. I still ate breakfast alone. The only difference was the lottery ticket locked inside a small metal box in my bedroom closet. For the next few days, I followed my normal routine. I visited the pharmacy. I attended church on Sunday. I stopped by the grocery store for milk and bread. Nobody treated me differently because nobody knew. That was exactly how I wanted it. By Wednesday afternoon, however, I received my first surprise. My phone rang while I was folding laundry. Sophie's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment. Sophie rarely called unless she needed something. The last time we had spoken on the phone was nearly 4 months earlier. I answered. "Grandma," she said warmly. "I was just thinking about you." The words sounded pleasant enough, but something about them felt rehearsed. We spoke for 10 minutes. She asked about my health. She asked whether I needed help around the house. She even mentioned visiting soon. After we hung up, I sat quietly on the edge of my bed. Sophie had not asked about my birthday. Not once. The following day, Ethan called. That alone was unusual. Ethan preferred texting because it was faster. Yet somehow he suddenly had time for a 30-minute conversation. He asked if I had been lonely. He asked if I was taking care of myself. He even suggested taking me out for dinner sometime. I thanked him and listened carefully. Once again, my birthday never came up. Neither did the years of missed holidays and forgotten invitations. It was as though everyone wanted to skip over the past and start fresh without acknowledging what had happened. Then came Friday evening. I was sitting in my living room reading a mystery novel when someone knocked on the door. When I opened it, Jake stood there holding a bouquet of flowers. I nearly dropped my reading glasses. Jake had not visited in almost a year. He smiled awkwardly and handed me the flowers. "Just wanted to stop by and see how you were doing, Grandma." I invited him inside. We drank lemonade in the kitchen and talked for nearly an hour. Yet throughout the conversation, I noticed something strange. He seemed nervous, distracted, as if he were searching for a way to ask a question he had not quite figured out how to ask. When he finally left, I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I looked at the flowers sitting on my kitchen counter. 3 phone calls. 1 surprise visit. All within a single week. For years, silence had filled this house. Suddenly, everyone seemed to remember I existed. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe guilt had finally caught up with them. Or maybe news traveled faster than I realized. Whatever the reason, I had no intention of revealing the truth. Not yet. Because for the first time in a very long time, I felt as though I was finally seeing my family clearly. The following week answered the question I had been quietly asking myself. The attention did not slow down. It grew. On Monday morning, Sophie showed up with a basket of muffins from a bakery across town. She claimed she had simply been passing through the neighborhood. The problem was that nobody passed through my neighborhood on the way to anywhere. It sat at the edge of town, surrounded by quiet streets and old maple trees. I thanked her anyway and invited her inside. We spent an hour talking over coffee. Or at least that was what it looked like on the surface. In reality, Sophie spent most of the visit asking careful questions. Had I made any big plans lately? Was I thinking about traveling? Had I ever considered moving closer to family? Each question sounded innocent by itself. Together, they felt like pieces of a puzzle. 2 days later, Ethan called again. This time he wanted to take me to dinner. We met at a steakhouse about 15 miles away. During the meal, he spoke about family more than I had heard him speak about family in years. He reminisced about summer vacations. He talked about Grandpa. He even apologized for being distant. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to accept every word without question. Then the conversation shifted. He casually asked whether I had ever considered updating my estate plans. The question arrived so smoothly that another person might not have noticed it. I noticed. I smiled and changed the subject. By Friday, I could no longer ignore the pattern. Jake called twice in the same day. Sophie sent photos from her childhood and told me how much she missed our time together. Ethan suggested organizing a family reunion. The sudden affection felt almost overwhelming. Yet every gesture carried a strange urgency beneath it, as though they were all racing towards something invisible. That evening, I attended my regular church social. I sat beside my longtime friend Helen, who had known me for nearly 30 years. Helen listened quietly while I described the unexpected attention from my grandchildren. When I finished, she stirred her tea and gave me a thoughtful look. "People usually reveal themselves when money enters the room," she said softly. "Not because money changes them. Because it removes the need to hide what was already there." Her words stayed with me all weekend. On Sunday afternoon, I opened an old photo album. There were pictures of Ethan learning to ride a bicycle. Sophie covered in cookie dough at age 8. Jake smiling proudly beside a science fair project. I sat there for nearly an hour turning pages. The memories were real. The love had been real too. That was what made everything so difficult. I was not trying to punish anyone. I simply wanted to know whether the people calling me now were the same people who had forgotten me before. As the sun began to set, I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. Then I made a decision. If everyone suddenly wanted a place in my life, I would give them an opportunity to prove why. Not with promises. Not with words. With actions. And before long, each of my grandchildren would face a test they never saw coming. The following Tuesday, I put my plan into motion. I called each of my grandchildren separately and invited them to lunch on different days. I wanted to speak with them one at a time, away from the influence of siblings and family group chats. Sophie came first. We met at a small cafe near the town square. She arrived 10 minutes early, dressed neatly and carrying a bright smile. For the first half hour, everything felt pleasant. We talked about work, old memories, and mutual friends. Then I introduced the first test. I told her that the roof on my house needed repairs and that I was worried about the cost. The statement was not entirely true. The roof was fine. I simply wanted to see her reaction. Sophie immediately began suggesting ways I could protect my savings. She talked about financial planning, investment accounts, and preserving assets. Not once did she offer to help. Not once did she ask whether I needed assistance. The conversation remained polite, but when I drove home, I felt disappointed. 2 days later, I met Ethan. His test was different. During dinner, I mentioned that my arthritis had been bothering me and that I might need help with some yard work before winter arrived. Ethan nodded sympathetically. He told me how important health was. He shared advice he had read online. Then he explained how busy he would be over the next few months. By the time dessert arrived, I knew exactly where I stood. His concern sounded sincere, yet it never transformed into action. The final meeting belonged to Jake. I invited him over on a Saturday morning. We sat on the back porch drinking coffee while a cool breeze moved through the trees. After a while, I told him I had been feeling lonely lately. Unlike the others, Jake did not rush to offer solutions. He simply listened. We sat there quietly for a moment. Then he asked whether I wanted company. The question caught me off guard. Not advice. Not suggestions. Just company. He stayed most of the afternoon. We looked through old photographs. We talked about his grandfather. We even played a card game that neither of us had played in years. When he finally left, the house felt a little less empty. Over the next several weeks, the differences became even clearer. Sophie continued calling, but nearly every conversation drifted toward money, investments, or future plans. Ethan became increasingly interested in discussing family responsibilities and long-term decisions. Jake called too, but his conversations were different. Sometimes he spoke about work. Sometimes he shared stories from his week. Sometimes he called for no reason at all. Slowly, the picture began to sharpen. I was learning something that money could never buy. I was learning who showed up because they cared and who showed up because they sensed opportunity. Yet I still was not ready to reveal what I knew. The real test had only just begun, and soon an unexpected opportunity would reveal even more than I ever imagined. A few days later, the opportunity one had been waiting for arrived on its own. It began with a conversation I was never supposed to hear. I had stopped by a local bakery to pick up a loaf of cinnamon bread when I noticed Sophie sitting near the window with Ethan. They had not seen me. I was about to walk over and say hello when a few words caught my attention. "If Grandma is really doing that well, we need to stay close," Sophie said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I know. We cannot just disappear for years and expect everything to work itself out." I stood frozen beside a display of cookies. Neither of them sounded concerned about me. They sounded concerned about positioning themselves. I left without saying a word. Driving home, I felt strangely calm. A few months earlier, that conversation would have broken my heart. Now it simply confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. The next morning, Ethan called and invited me to a family barbecue he wanted to host the following weekend. The invitation surprised me because Ethan had not organized a family gathering in years. When Saturday arrived, I drove to his house carrying a bowl of potato salad. The backyard was filled with people. Sophie was there. Jake was there. Several cousins and family friends were there as well. At first glance, everything looked normal. Laughter floated through the air. Children chased each other across the lawn. Music played softly from a speaker near the patio. Yet throughout the afternoon, I noticed something unusual. My grandchildren kept finding reasons to stay close to me. Sophie offered to refill my drink 3 different times. Ethan insisted I sit in the most comfortable chair. Both of them seemed eager to demonstrate how attentive they could be. Jake behaved differently. He spent most of his time helping Ethan cook and playing catch with some younger relatives. Every so often he checked on me, but never in a way that felt performative. Near sunset, the conversation drifted toward future plans. Ethan spoke about buying a larger home. Sophie mentioned a business opportunity she wanted to pursue. Neither one directly asked me for anything, but both repeatedly brought up the rising cost of life and the importance of family helping family. I listened quietly. The more they talked, the clearer the picture became. They were circling a subject they did not quite dare mention openly. On the drive home, Jake called me. He had left the barbecue only minutes before. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safely," he said. We spoke for 10 minutes. Not once did he mention money, investments, inheritances, or future plans. When the call ended, I sat in my driveway for a long moment. The contrast between my grandchildren had never been more obvious. One offered attention when an audience was watching. Another offered concern when nobody was watching at all. As I walked into the house, I realized the next stage of my plan was ready. Soon, each of them would receive a letter from me. The letters would contain no money, no promises, and no secrets. What they did contain would reveal far more about their character than any conversation ever could. On Monday morning, I mailed 3 letters. Each one contained a simple request. Nothing dramatic. Nothing expensive. Just an opportunity to help. Sophie's letter explained that the community center where I volunteered needed assistance organizing donations for a charity drive. Ethan's letter asked whether he could spend one Saturday helping an elderly neighbor clear out a storage shed before winter. Jake's letter invited him to join me at the community center for a few hours the following weekend. Then I waited. The responses arrived quickly. Sophie called first. She sounded enthusiastic until she learned there was no publicity involved, no networking opportunity, and no business benefit. Suddenly her schedule became complicated. She apologized repeatedly and promised to participate another time. Ethan responded through a text message. He explained that work had become extremely demanding and that weekends were his only chance to rest. He wished everyone well and hoped the project would be successful. Neither answer surprised me. Jake's response arrived differently. He simply called and asked what time he should be there. The following Saturday, he arrived 10 minutes early. Together we spent the morning carrying boxes of donated clothing, sorting canned goods, and organizing supplies for local families. The work was not glamorous. Nobody took photographs. Nobody posted about it online. Yet Jake never complained. During a lunch break, we sat outside on a wooden bench eating sandwiches prepared by volunteers. For a while we watched children play in a nearby park. Then Jake surprised me. "Grandma," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. He hesitated before speaking. "Why does it feel like everyone suddenly wants to spend time together?" The question lingered between us. I looked at him carefully. Unlike the others, he did not seem suspicious or calculating. He seemed genuinely confused. I chose my words carefully. "What do you think?" I asked. Jake stared at the ground for a moment. "Honestly, I do not know. But it feels different. Like everyone is trying too hard." I smiled sadly because he had noticed the same thing I had. We spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side. When the event finally ended, several volunteers thanked him for his help. Jake looked embarrassed by the attention. As we walked toward the parking lot, he carried the last box without being asked. That small gesture stayed with me. Later that evening, I sat alone in my living room reviewing everything that had happened over the previous weeks. The letters had revealed exactly what I needed to know. Sophie and Ethan were willing to offer words. Jake was willing to offer time. There is a difference between the two. Time is expensive because once it is given away, it never comes back. Looking around the quiet room, I realized the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. The test was over. I knew who had shown up because they cared. What I did not know was how the rest of the family would react when they learned that I knew far more than they ever suspected. By the beginning of the next month, I had stopped wondering whether the truth would reveal itself. It already had. The only thing left was deciding what to do with that knowledge. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from the attorney handling the lottery claim. Most of the paperwork had been completed, and everything was moving forward smoothly. After the call ended, I sat quietly at my kitchen table looking out the window. The maple leaves had started changing color. Autumn was arriving. My husband used to say that seasons reveal things. Summer hides imperfections beneath bright sunshine. Autumn exposes what is ready to fall away. For some reason, I could not stop thinking about those words. Later that week, I invited the family to dinner. Not a holiday. Not a birthday. Just dinner. The responses arrived almost immediately. Sophie said she would be there. Ethan cleared his schedule. Even relatives who rarely attended family gatherings suddenly found time to come. On the evening of the dinner, my dining room looked much different than it had on my birthday. Every chair was occupied. Conversations filled the room. Laughter drifted through the house. Anyone looking from the outside might have thought we were the closest family in America. As I served food, I noticed something else. The attention never left me. Sophie complimented the meal repeatedly. Ethan offered to help with every small task. Several relatives asked detailed questions about my plans for the future. The entire evening felt like a performance. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. Eventually, the conversation turned exactly where I expected it would. Ethan mentioned rising home prices. Sophie talked about financial security. Another relative brought up retirement planning. Nobody directly mentioned money, yet money seemed present in every sentence. I listened patiently. Then I asked a simple question. If you suddenly had everything you needed, what would you do with your life? The room grew quieter. Sophie spoke about expanding her business. Ethan discussed buying property. Others mentioned travel, investments, and personal goals. The answers were not wrong. They were honest. Yet something was missing. When I asked Jake, he thought for a moment before answering. I would spend more time with people I care about, he said. You cannot buy more time later. Nobody said anything after that. The room fell silent for several seconds. I looked around the table and realized that the evening had given me my final answer. Not because of what people said. Because of what they valued. After dinner ended, everyone helped clean up. As the last car disappeared down the street, I returned to the dining room alone. The same room where I had once stared at 6 empty chairs. The same room where I had discovered the winning ticket. I sat down and looked at the table. This time, I felt no sadness. Only clarity. The following morning, I scheduled one final family meeting. There would be no more tests. No more observations. No more waiting. The time had come to tell the truth, and I knew that what happened next would change every relationship in my family forever. When the family arrived for the meeting, I could feel the anticipation in the room. Everyone tried to appear relaxed, but years of life had taught me how to recognize expectation when I saw it. We gathered in the same dining room where so much had happened over the past few months. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the table where my grandchildren now sat waiting. Sophie smiled politely. Ethan looked unusually serious. Jake appeared confused, as though he still did not understand why I had asked everyone to come. I took a deep breath and stood. There is something I need to tell all of you, I said. The room immediately became silent. Several months ago, I purchased a lottery ticket. I paused. No one spoke. That ticket turned out to be worth several $1,000,000. The silence deepened. Sophie blinked rapidly. Ethan shifted in his chair. Around the room, faces registered surprise, excitement, and curiosity. I continued before anyone could interrupt. I kept the news private because I wanted time to think. More importantly, I wanted time to observe. Several people exchanged nervous glances. I looked directly at my grandchildren. For years, I spent birthdays alone. I spent holidays wondering whether anyone remembered me. I told myself everyone was busy. I made excuses because I loved my family. My voice remained calm. Then suddenly, attention returned. Calls returned. Invitations returned. Nobody argued. Nobody denied it. They could not. We all knew it was true. I opened a folder and removed several papers. I have already made my decisions regarding the money. Every eye focused on the documents. A large portion will go to local charities, community programs, educational scholarships, and organizations that help older adults who feel forgotten. The room remained silent. Another portion will be placed into a family trust designed to support future generations responsibly. Sophie lowered her eyes. Ethan stared at the table. Then I smiled and turned toward Jake. And one person will receive a special gift. Jake looked genuinely startled. Not because he asked for anything, I said. Not because he expected anything. But because he showed up when there was no reward. He gave something far more valuable than money. He gave time. Jake looked as though he wanted to protest. I gently raised a hand. This is not a reward. It is a thank you. Tears filled his eyes. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie quietly apologized. Ethan followed. Neither excuse was dramatic. Neither apology erased the past. But both sounded sincere. Perhaps hearing the truth forced them to confront something they had been avoiding. As the meeting ended and family members slowly prepared to leave, I walked to the front door and watched them step into the afternoon sunlight. This time, I did not feel angry. I did not feel vindicated. I felt peaceful. The lottery money changed many things, but it gave me something even more valuable than financial security. It revealed who people were when they thought nobody was watching. And in the end, that truth became the greatest gift I received. As I closed the door behind me, the house no longer felt empty. For the first time in years, it felt like home again.